Okay, this is now the 5 Minute Tarot for the 25th of June 2017. And today I'd like to consider, what do you do if you pick a bad card, or if you turn a card that you don't like, for example, the Ten of Swords, which in its own way represents ruin and defeat. Okay, so somebody asks a question, you turn the Ten of Swords, you might be tempted to put it back in the deck or make some excuse or say something about, I don't know, I don't like the look of this, or something like that, and put it back in, and then pick another card that's easier to talk about, or choose a card or pick one at random, and you like it because it means you can give good news, because we can often not want to talk about problems or indicate that the future looks bleak or it looks bad or it doesn't look good. So we can be tempted as readers to keep picking cards. If we don't like the look of a card, we don't deal with it, but instead we keep picking cards until we get cards that we do like the look of. So this can make it easier for the reader, or apparently easier for the reader, but it's maybe not realistic, or it's maybe not truthful, actually, for the questioner. So maybe by not trusting that the card you got, the bad card that you got, was actually important to talk about with the questioner, you can be doing them a disservice if you decide that this Ten of Swords isn't right or relevant, or isn't what I want to talk about, and put it back in the deck. So what you do is, if you turn a card that you don't like or that you're not happy with, what you do is you reread the question. And this is one of the reasons why it's important to write down the question before you pick cards. Because let's say you get the Ten of Swords. If you reread the question, it's going to give you a starting point for what the card shows. So what you're doing is, instead of turning the card and thinking, oh no, this is defeat, or this is ruin, or this is terrible, from the Ten of Swords, again, let's say the Ten of Swords. Instead of turning the card and starting with the apparent meaning, you turn the card and you start with the question. And when you start with the question, then the card will give you a sense of the answer. And the thing is, it really does depend on the question that was asked and how you wrote it down and how it was worded, because there's a difference between, for example, what's going to happen with this situation and how do I do this properly, or even what are the odds for success. So those are three. You can have the same situation, and those can be three different questions that the person asks, or maybe you write down one of them and forget about the other two, even though you might think they're pretty much the same question. But I think you need to start with the actual question that was asked and the wording that was used, and then you look to the illustration on the card to derive the answer. So let's say the question that was written down was, what's going to happen with this situation? So the answer can be telling you, and again, it depends on you know the context of the question, so you know if it's telling you about the next important phase, and that's what's going to happen. That's what's being shown by the card, or maybe it's the final outcome, right? But either way, let's say what's going to happen with this situation, we turn and we get the Ten of Swords that shows somebody lying face down in the sand, having been stabbed in the back. So what's going to happen with this situation? And we look at the card and say, okay, it's probably not pleasant, right? Because it's the Ten of Swords. We don't try and make it sound good, but we start with, okay, it's probably not pleasant and it's not enjoyable, and you're going to feel done in, and things are going to go against you, or you give some kind of description like that. And then maybe you say, but it's a 10, at least it's an ending. And that means a new beginning is going to follow. And that idea, or being able to tell the questioner that a new beginning is about to start or about to be upon them, that can be what's important for them to know. And so you might say to them, okay, we've got the Ten of Swords. It's defeat, but forget the past and get ready to make a new start. And that can be maybe all that you can say about the card, but at least it's useful and valid information, and it's going to be relevant for the questioner. Because the question could have been, how do I do this properly? And you get the Ten of Swords. So if the questioner is the person who's lying face down in the sand, they've been defeated. So what you say to them, how do you handle this properly? You start from a position of defeat. You recognize that you lost, or that you've been defeated, or it didn't work, or it was a failure, a miserable failure, or that people let you down. And you start, this is probably being realistic, that there was defeat. And if you start from the reality of the situation, that you were defeated or you lost, and build from there, what you build can be strong. But if you pretend that things were okay and don't face the fact that you were defeated or things didn't work out, then what you build is going to be flawed. You're going to build in a weakness just because you don't want to face the truth. At the same time, it's a 10. So 10 is 1 plus nothing. So it's almost a new start. So what you do is with this 10, assess the past and understand how you got into the predicament, and set up some rules for behavior or for dealing with other people, so you don't repeat the mistakes in the future that you made in the past that brought you to a bad situation or a situation that was not pleasant. And the thing is, if you don't assess the past, you're going to carry problems and blind spots into the future, and you're going to have to do it all over again. So there are good reasons for facing up to what went wrong, because it means that it's cause and effect. If you change the cause by introducing some new ideas, or deciding you're not going to do the same thing again, you change the outcome. Or maybe the third variation of the question was, what are the odds for success? And so somebody wants to know, what are the odds for success? You're trying to get the Ten of Swords. And what do you say? You don't put the card back. You say, they're probably not good. They're not that favourable. This is if we assume that the questioner is the person lying face down in the sand. So these swords in the picture, they can be warnings that were ignored. So were there warning signs that you ignored up to now? Or maybe there were threats that you didn't take seriously. So you, the questioner, were there indications of threats that you chose to ignore? In which case, deal with them. Or maybe there were fears that you didn't want to face. So were the things you were afraid of, or whatever it happens to be. So if the questioner says, yes, I was afraid of this and this, then by facing the fear, they're going to be able to alleviate the situation or the problem, or avoid the impact. And so if the swords represent threats, you say, were there threats? And you say, yes, but I didn't take them seriously. In which case you talk about what the threats were and how they could handle them more intelligently or handle them better, so that if the threats remain in the future, they're not going to be defeated by them. Right? So you actually talk about what's going on. You could do what they call a SWOT analysis, SWOT, where you make a list of the strengths that you've got, the weaknesses, the opportunities presented, and the threats to do with the situation. And then in the light of the information you come up with, you make a decision. So maybe the person has written a book and they want to know, what are the odds of getting an agent? Because they want to be the new J.K. Rowling or George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones. They want to be a major blockbuster bestseller author, but you can't be published by a big publishing company unless you go through an agent. They're not going to look at your manuscript. So you need an agent. So we want to know, what are the odds of me getting an agent? And the answer is the Ten of Swords. The odds are not good. Don't hold your breath. You're probably not going to get an agent. Or if you do, it's going to take you a long time. And it's not going to work out that well. Only because we've got the Ten of Swords here. So the odds are against you getting an agent. And that's what you tell the questioner. but you also mention maybe you approach it in a different way. So you don't pick a card for what or for how they should handle the situation. You actually have a discussion with the questioner about what can be done or what should be done or what's possible or what's feasible. So if you can't get an agent, what do? You can self-publish. Maybe that's the way to go. There's Kindle nowadays. There are PDFs you can sell. You can set up a blog and publish parts of the story and build up a mailing list and get a fan base. And then you can have a website and you can have related material. And maybe you show people how you're coming up with the ideas. There's a lot that can be done so that even if you don't get an agent, it doesn't mean that it's not going to work and that there's no point in doing it. So if you were to look at the Ten of Swords for the meaning, you might think, okay, it's pointless. And you might be defeated by the picture on the card, and the questioner might decide to give up and not follow through because they see the Ten of Swords. But if you go back to the question and think, okay, what are the odds of success? The odds aren't good. So what are you going to do instead? Rather than, I'm beaten. It's not going to work. I'm going to give up. But you face that kind of limited thinking if you start with the supposed meaning. Whereas if you begin with the question, you've got a better chance of answering the question for the questioner and being of use to them, because you end up, they're in a stronger position to understand what's really going on and what could happen. So they're in a better position to actually make it happen. Okay, that was that for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.